They say avoidants don't break when the relationship ends. They break when the truth finally catches up to them. And that truth doesn't arrive with drama, shouting, or tears. It arrives quietly in a moment where they suddenly understand the damage they caused, the heart they cracked open, the love they mishandled, and the person they pushed away without ever realizing what that loss would mean. At first, they don't notice anything. They assume you'll be fine. They assume they will be fine. They assume distance will protect them the way it always has. But it never works that way, not in the moments that matter. Not when the person they pulled away from was the one who loved them beyond their defenses. The avoidance breaking point never happens while they're running. It happens when they stop and look back, only to realize what's no longer behind them. In the beginning, after they detach, they fall into that familiar emotional numbness they've used their whole life. It's a shield, a habit, a survival technique. They tell themselves they needed space. They convince themselves you were asking too much, wanting too much, needing too much. They justify every withdrawal as self-preservation, not realizing they were tearing apart someone's heart while trying to protect their own. They genuinely believe you'll always be there, waiting, understanding, forgiving, reaching out even when they step back. They mistake your consistency for permanence, your loyalty for inevitability, your love for something that would never run out or fade away. So at first they feel relief or something that looks like relief. They distract themselves with work, noise, people, scrolling, anything that keeps them from facing the emptiness that silence creates. They tell themselves they made the right choice, even though a small, quiet part of them already knows they didn't. But that illusion only lasts as long as your energy is still present. The moment you go quiet, everything shifts. When they check their phone and see nothing, no message, no reassurance, no checking in, no just making sure you're okay, there's a pause in their chest they can't name. It feels unfamiliar, almost foreign, because they've spent so long believing distance gives them control. Yet now the silence feels heavy, different from all the times before. It isn't a protest. It isn't punishment. It isn't manipulation. It's absence. A kind of absence that tells them something is wrong. A kind that tells them they may have finally gone too far. Your withdrawal doesn't look like another chase waiting to happen. It looks like the end of something they never expected to lose. That's when confusion begins to creep in. Not the loud, chaotic kind, but the quiet, unsettling kind that sits in the back of their mind and whispers questions they don't want to hear. Did they push too hard? Did they misread everything? Did they assume too much? Did they mistake your softness for weakness and your devotion for dependency? The more they sit with these questions, the more uncomfortable they become. But this discomfort is still only the beginning, because beneath it lies another realization they've avoided their entire life. They never actually wanted you gone. They just didn't know how to handle being close to someone who saw them clearly, someone who made them feel vulnerable, someone who touched places inside them. They didn't know how to protect. And now that the closeness is gone, now that the warmth is gone, now that your presence is nowhere to be found, they feel the cold for the first time. Not the cold of solitude, that's familiar to them. It's the cold of losing a person who made their world softer, brighter, safer, even when they pretended not to need it. Something inside them begins to tighten, like an emotional knot pulled too hard. They try to shake it off, but it keeps returning. Small moments start replaying in their mind. Things you said, things you did, the way you stayed, even when they pushed you away. They remember your patience, not your pressure, your loyalty, not your demands, your love, not your flaws. These memories hit harder because they're no longer backed by the comfort of your presence. They hit harder because there's no guarantee they'll ever feel them again. The avoidance breaking point starts as a quiet recognition. They pushed away someone who wasn't trying to hurt them, someone who wasn't trying to control them, someone who wasn't trying to take anything from them. You were simply trying to love them in a way that didn't ask them to be anyone other than who they already were. But by the time they realize this, the damage is done. And that's where the true emotional fracture begins. Not in the moment they left, but in the moment they understand what leaving actually cost them. The heart they destroyed wasn't dramatic or demanding. It was steady, patient, and secure. And in their attempt to protect themselves, they shattered the very thing that once protected them from their own loneliness. When that realization lands, it doesn't whisper, it hits. And that is the beginning of their breaking point. Your silence doesn't just change the dynamic, it changes them. At first, they don't know how to interpret it. Avoidants expect reactions, emotions, explanations. They're used to you reaching out or checking in or trying to mend whatever distance they've created. So when you stop doing all of that, when you reclaim your peace instead of chasing theirs, something inside them begins to wobble. They feel a shift they can't fully define. It's the first time they've felt the ground beneath them move. The first time they realize they no longer have the emotional upper hand. Your withdrawal removes the predictability they relied on, the reassurance they secretly depended on, and the comfort they took for granted. The silence isn't loud, but its meaning is. It tells them the story is changing. It tells them the cycle has ended. It tells them you're no longer holding space for someone who refused to hold space for you. This is when they begin to notice how much of their emotional stability came from your presence, from knowing you cared, from knowing you'd try, from knowing you'd stay. They never said it out loud, but they needed that consistency more than they were ever willing to. Without it, small cracks start forming in the emotional walls they worked so hard to build. Suddenly, their mind isn't quiet anymore. They begin thinking about you at random times, wondering what you're doing, if you're okay, or if you've moved on. They open their phone out of habit, then quickly put it down, uncomfortable with the urge to reach out. They scroll through old messages, not because they miss the conversations, but because they miss the version of themselves who didn't feel this loss. They tell themselves it's nothing, just a temporary feeling, just an adjustment. But deep down, they know it's something else. It's the awareness they spent years avoiding but can no longer escape. That awareness deepens into something heavier, the internal collapse they never saw coming. They begin noticing the absence more than they ever noticed your presence. It hits during quiet moments, during late nights, during slow afternoons. It hits when they're alone, but it also hits in a room full of people. They reach for distractions the way they always do. They try to drown the discomfort in noise, work, or temporary connections. But nothing sticks. Nothing numbs. Nothing feels right. The things that worked in the past don't work anymore because this isn't just distance, it's loss. They can feel it in their chest in the restless way they move through their day, in the way their thoughts keep circling back to you. The detachment they once felt proud of now feels like a mistake they can't undo. They start replaying moments they ignored when they had the chance to appreciate them. The softness in your voice, the concern in your questions, the gentleness in your presence. These memories turn into emotional flashbacks, not because they want to go back, but because they're finally realizing the meaning behind what you gave. They begin to see the patience you offered, effort you made, the way you loved them with an openness they didn't know how to hold. And in that realization, something breaks. The internal collapse isn't dramatic, it's quiet, subtle, and intensely personal. It's the weight of understanding they pushed away someone who never wanted to hurt them. It's the recognition that their fear created the exact outcome they hoped to avoid. It's the moment they realize the emptiness they're feeling isn't loneliness, it's regret. Avoidants don't often admit regret out loud, but they feel it deeply when it comes. It shows up as restlessness, irritation, sudden emotional heaviness, and a sense of something unfinished. They feel the loss of you not all at once, but in waves that come without warning. And each wave chips away at the emotional numbness they once relied on for safety. Your silence is no longer just silence, it's a mirror. It forces them to confront the truth they spent their whole life trying to outrun. They destroyed something they never intended to lose. And now, with nothing left to chase and nothing left to control, they're left standing in the emptiness they created, finally aware of the heart they broke and the damage they caused. That's the moment their internal collapse begins. The moment they realize your absence hurts more than your presence ever did. The memories don't hit all at once. They come quietly, slipping into the avoidance mind at moments when they least expect it. Maybe it's a song, a time of day, a place you once talked about, or even something small, like the way someone laughs. At first, they try to shake it off, telling themselves it's nothing, just their brain being dramatic. But the flashbacks keep coming, and each one carries a piece of you they can't outrun. They remember your kindness and moments they dismissed. They remember your patience on days they pushed you away. They remember your softness during times they pretended not to care. The moments they once brushed off as insignificant now feel heavy, meaningful, and painfully irreplaceable. They begin to see your intentions clearly, the care behind your questions, the love behind your presence, the sincerity behind your efforts. They realize you weren't trying to overwhelm them. You were trying to connect. You weren't trying to pressure them. You were trying to understand. You weren't trying to trap them. You were trying to build something real. These flashbacks become emotional reminders of what they had and didn't value, what they pushed away and didn't protect, what they took for granted because they assumed it would always be there. And every time a memory surfaces, it hits harder because it's no longer connected to your presence. It's connected to your absence. They can't reach out and feel the warmth they once felt. They can't turn to you for reassurance. They can't expect you to fix the emotional imbalance they created. The memories start to feel like echoes, repeating not to torment them, but to reveal the truth they ignored. They were loved deeply, consistently, and honestly, and they didn't know how to receive it. Now, every soft moment feels like a reminder of what they lost, and every reminder feels like a consequence they didn't foresee. The more these memories surface, the harder it becomes for them to stay numb, because the flashbacks make it impossible to pretend they didn't care. They cared, but too late, too quietly, too internally for you to ever feel it. This is when guilt begins to settle in slowly at first, then heavier with every passing day. Avoidants don't handle guilt well because guilt forces them to confront their own emotional responsibility, something they've spent years avoiding. They don't know how to hold it, how to process it, or how to admit it. So instead, it shows up as frustration, irritability, or sudden sadness. They find themselves getting annoyed at situations that didn't bother them before. They stay busy, but the busyness doesn't quiet their mind. They distract themselves, but the distraction never lasts long enough. The guilt becomes a weight they carry in silence, one they don't talk about because doing so would require them to admit two things. They were loved, and they hurt the person who loved them. They start replaying not just the good moments, but the bad ones too. The times they shut down when you needed connection, the times they dismissed your feelings, the times they pulled away when you reached out, the times they veil you for problems that were actually rooted in their own fear. They think about the messages they never answered, the apologies they never gave, the gratitude they never expressed, and beneath all of that lies a deeper realization: you weren't asking for too much. They were giving too little. You weren't the problem. You were the person trying to solve a problem they refused to acknowledge. That realization is painful because it breaks the narrative they used to protect themselves. They can't justify their behavior with "I wasn't ready" or "I needed space" the same way they used to. They see the truth now. Their fear didn't just push you away, it broke you. And that truth stays with them, no matter how much they try to run from it. The guilt becomes a quiet ache, a lingering heaviness that follows them into conversations, routines, and even sleep. They wonder if they could have done better, if they should have communicated more, if they could have let their guards down instead of letting their fear dictate their actions. But guilt is complicated for them. It's not just about what they did, it's about what they didn't do. It's about the love they couldn't accept, the vulnerability they couldn't offer, the connection they didn't know how to nurture. And the hardest part is knowing that you didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because they stopped meeting you halfway. This realization often becomes their emotional turning point, the moment they recognize not only what they lost, but how much of that loss was their own doing. They didn't just hurt your heart, they damaged something inside themselves too. And now they're left with the weight of that truth, unsure how to face it, how to fix it, or how to carry it without breaking even further. The breaking point doesn't show up with a dramatic moment or a sudden burst of emotion. It arrives quietly, like a pressure building beneath the surface, until they can't ignore it anymore. One day, they wake up and realize the silence isn't temporary. Your absence isn't a phase. The distance isn't something you're planning to fix. And that's when the emotional weight they've been avoiding finally crashes down. They feel it in the way their chest tightens when they think of you. They feel it in the confusion that hits them when they try to understand how things slipped so far out of reach. They feel it when they check their phone, expecting a message that never comes. The sudden emptiness becomes a mirror, showing them the truth they never dared to face until now. You're gone, not because you wanted to leave, but because they gave you no reason to stay. This realization doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes them. They never believed they would be the one left behind. They always assumed you'd be the constant, the reliable one, the person who would find a way to reach through the cracks, no matter how wide they grew. But now the distance feels permanent, and the permanence feels like a wound. As the truth settles in, jealousy creeps in too, not necessarily because someone else has you, but because they no longer do. Regret begins to gnaw at them in small, sharp ways. They imagine conversations that will never happen, apologies they never gave, love they never expressed. They imagine what they should have done differently, what they should have said sooner, what they should have held on to instead of pushing away. And all those thoughts blend into a single realization. The love they always believed they could pick back up is no longer waiting for them. The person they thought would always choose them has now chosen themselves. That's when the fear begins. Not the fear of closeness they carried when you were there, but the fear of losing you forever. It's ironic and cruel. The very thing they avoided when you were close becomes the thing they crave now that you're gone. Their emotional breaking point is a collision of contradictions. Wanting to reach out but not knowing how, wanting to apologize but fearing it won't matter, wanting you back but not knowing if they have the courage to show up differently. The guilt, the memories, the emptiness, the longing, it all merges into one undeniable truth they can't escape. They destroyed something they didn't know how to cherish. And now, for the first time, the cost of that destruction feels real. Their breaking point opens the door to a realization they've spent so long avoiding. The fantasy they built in their mind doesn't match the reality they're living in now. Avoidants often rely on fantasy to protect themselves, a version of the relationship where they're still in control, even when they distance themselves. In this fantasy, you always return, you always forgive, you always try again. They imagined you as a steady, unchanging presence, someone who could withstand their silence, their confusion, their push and pull behavior without ever reaching your limit. In their mind, you were the constant, the emotional safety net they never had to earn because you always offered it freely. But fantasy collapses under the weight of reality, and reality is what they're left with now. The reality where your silence means something different. The reality where your absence isn't a test, but a decision. The reality where you've learned to protect your heart the way they always protected theirs. They never imagined a version of the story where you would choose yourself. They never imagined a version where you would stop fighting for the connection. They never imagined a version where they would be the one longing, regretting, and hurting. And that's what makes the truth hit so hard. In their fantasy, they believed they could return whenever they felt ready. In reality, they discover that love doesn't keep its doors open forever. In their fantasy, they believed losing you wasn't possible. In reality, they see that the loss already happened. In their fantasy, they believed distance was a form of control. In reality, distance became the reason everything fell apart. This collision between fantasy and reality is where their heartbreak begins. Not because you tried to punish them, but because they're finally seeing the truth without the shield of avoidance. They're seeing that the love they pushed away wasn't something they could replace, recreate, or ignore. And for the first time, they understand the biggest loss wasn't you leaving, it was them not appreciating you when you were there. The hardest part of the avoidance journey isn't the moment they realize you're gone. It's everything that comes after. Because the world doesn't suddenly collapse in some dramatic emotional outburst. Instead, their punishment is quiet, subtle, and deeply internal. It happens in the spaces no one else sees. It happens when they're alone, when the distractions fade, when they're left with nothing but their thoughts and the silence they once used as a shield. The invisible punishment begins when they start noticing how different their life feels without you in it. They notice the absence in small, unexpected ways in the morning when they wake up and realize there's no message waiting for them during the day when something reminds them of a conversation you once had, or at night when the stillness becomes too loud to ignore. They feel the difference between having someone who cared and not having that anymore, and the contrast is sharper than they ever imagined. What they once called peace now feels like emptiness. What they once called space now feels like distance. What they once called freedom now feels like isolation. They used to think you were the one who needed them, but now they see how much they relied on your warmth, your softness, your emotional grounding. They miss the way you understood their moods without forcing them to talk. They miss the way your presence softened the heaviness they carried inside. They miss the way you made the world feel less intimidating, less chaotic, less lonely. They miss it quietly, silently, in a way they don't tell anyone, but they feel it constantly. And it hits them hardest when they see you recovering, growing, healing, because part of their invisible punishment is watching you rise without them. They see the strength in your distance, the clarity in your silence, the peace in your absence. They notice how different you seem, calmer, more confident, more grounded. They see you reclaiming your energy, your time, your sense of self, and that changes everything for them because deep down, they know your growth is happening because you stop trying to fix them, save them, or hold space for someone who refused to hold space for you. It forces them to confront something they never expected to feel, the truth that they were the one who caused the loss, and you were the one who transformed it. You didn't fall apart without them. You didn't break, even though they broke your heart. Instead, you built yourself back up, stronger, wiser, more self-protective, and that transformation becomes its own kind of mirror. It shows them what they could have had. It shows them the beauty of what they destroyed. It shows them the version of love they weren't ready to receive. This is where regret deepens into something heavier, a kind of emotional weight that lingers in the back of their mind. They start wondering what life would look like if they hadn't pulled away, if they had let themselves be vulnerable, if they had chosen connection over fears. They imagine the conversations you'd be having now, the closeness you could have built, the happiness they could have felt if they had allowed themselves to stay open instead of shutting down. But reality isn't built on could have, and the past doesn't bend to regret. What's done is done, and the consequences are now playing out in ways they never expected. Their invisible punishment isn't about seeing you with someone else. It's about seeing you with yourself, seeing you content, seeing you centered, seeing you become someone who doesn't revolve around their silence, their confusion, or their emotional inconsistency. They never prepared for this version of you because this version doesn't need them, and that truth is painful in a way they can't express, even to themselves. This leads to the final emotional punch, the realization that you were never asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum: consistency, honesty, presence, the things they couldn't give because they were too busy protecting their fear, too busy running from their own vulnerability. And now that you're gone, they finally see the difference between peace and avoidance, between independence and isolation, between solitude and loss. They finally understand that the walls they built to protect themselves ended up shutting out the one person who tried to love them genuinely. This is where the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The avoidant didn't lose you when you walked away. They lost you slowly, quietly, over time, in every moment they didn't show up, in every apology they never made, in every fear they let control their choices. They lost you long before the silence started, long before the distance grew, long before the ending arrived. And the moment they understand that is the moment the emotional collapse becomes complete. You didn't destroy them. You didn't punish them. You didn't seek revenge. You simply healed. You grew. You chose yourself. And sometimes that's the loudest lesson someone can learn. The lesson that doesn't come through confrontation, but through absence. Not through anger, but through peace. Not through demand, but through walking away with your dignity intact. In the end, the avoidant faces a truth they can't escape. They destroyed the heart that loved them, and in doing so, they lost the safest connection they ever had. They never expected the consequence to be your silence. They never expected the result to be your strength. They never expected to feel the loss as deeply as they do now, but they feel it every day, in every quiet moment, in every unanswered impulse to reach out, in every flashback of what you once shared. And the most painful part is knowing that the door they assumed would always be open is now closed, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally learned to care for yourself. This is the conclusion they never imagined. Sometimes the person who feared losing themselves in love ends up losing the one person who loved them the most. And sometimes the one who was pushed away becomes the one who rises higher than they ever thought possible. The avoidance breaking point isn't just the moment they realize what they lost, it's the moment they realize they were the reason for their own heartbreak. And so the story ends not with revenge, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth. A truth they can't unsee and you don't need to prove. You healed. They learned. And sometimes that's all the closure needed.